This video is brought to you by A12 Productions. Please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to enjoy the videos. Also, please try and comment and rate the videos. Thank you. Hey guys, and welcome to C++ tutorial number 5. Now in this tutorial, it's not going to be like a full-blown tutorial, but basically I looked over tutorial number 4, and I realized I didn't make some things so clear, so I'm just going to be going over those quickly again. Not this one, it's this one we want to be looking at here. Okay, now I've put this code up on Pastebin, and there is a link to it in tutorial number 4. But basically, I just want to cover everything because it's quite a lot to digest at the moment. But basically, here we have an int, and by the way, I did manage to find the values. I just looked it up on the internet and found on the MSDN. Here are the limits for all integer types, all here, okay? So I've just put those in comments here. But basically, here we create an int, and that goes from -214748367 to the positive number of that, okay? And now, if we look at a long int, it's exactly the same. And the same for a long, because a long is just a long int. Remember, in the previous tutorial, I went over, you know, rather than saying short int, you don't actually have to add the int bit on. You can just say short, and that will create a short int. Okay, it's the same with long. So long int or long is the same as a regular int, and that's the same with a signed long int and a signed long. So why is this? Why are all these the same values, you know? Like an int should be like the middle value, then a long should be the top value, and the short should be the lowest value. So how come an int and a long are exactly the same values? Well, basically, when you create an int, if you don't explicitly define whether it's short or long, and unsigned or signed, we're gonna go over signed later. The compiler will define it for you. So how does the compiler decide whether it's signed, unsigned, and long or short? Well, it doesn't decide on whatever value you have inside. It just decides based on the programmer who wrote the compiler. And just before we go on to the next bit, I just want to talk over signed. You know how unsigned says it can go from 0 to the highest value, so it can't be a negative value, basically. Well, signed just means it can be a negative value. So this is kind of bringing things into our head here. So going back anyway, the compiler will define it for you. So what does the compiler define if you don't explicitly say whether it's short, long, signed, or unsigned for an int? Well, basically, it says if you don't explicitly define it, this int will then become a long signed int. Okay, so when we create an int here, we're actually creating a, I'll just make a multi-line comment, we're actually creating a signed long. Okay, so that makes it a bit more clear. Here you can see I've sort of put this thing in multi-line comments, as in brackets sort of things. When we make an int without any other specifications, the compiler then says, okay, well, you haven't given it the specific specifications. I'm then going to have to give it those specifications myself, and I say that it's going to be assigned long, and that's why an int is the same as a long int and a long, and a signed long int and a signed long, because even here we haven't we've defined it's going to be long, but we haven't defined whether it's signed or unsigned. So again, the compiler kicks in and says, okay, you defined whether it's going to be long or short, but you haven't defined whether it's unsigned or signed, and again, I say it's going to be signed. So here, we're actually doing this. And that's the same for here. Okay, so yeah, and it's the same with shorts. When you define a short, if you don't define whether it's unsigned or signed, the compiler says, okay, it's going to be signed, I'm making it signed. So this is the same as creating a signed short, okay, like we've done here. This is exactly the same as this and this. So these two are exactly the same as these two, okay? Basically, all ints by default are signed, so I don't need to cover that again. Unless you explicitly define it as unsigned, the int is always going to be a signed int. In Visual C++ anyway, that is. So, yeah, that's just something I wanted to cover quickly. I think I've covered everything. I haven't gone over doubles, so I will do that quickly now, actually. So, whoops. When we create a long double, J. Okay, so long double J. What's the difference between a long double J and a double J? I'll make that a J2. Okay, so what's the difference between these two? Well, unlike in ints here, where if we define it as short, rather than having a maximum and minimum value of 2 million and something, or 2 billion rather, sorry, that's another thing I mixed up in the previous tutorial. I was saying ints had a maximum value of something around 2 million, when it's actually something around 2 billion, okay? Just to clear that up. So anyway, rather than when we define this as short, we say we cut it from 2 billion down to 32,000, okay? Double doesn't increase those two. It just says you can have more decimal places. So, for instance, here we might be allowed to have so many decimal places, whereas here we might be able to have this. Okay, let's just copy and paste that. And then we can copy and paste this decimal, and we might be able to have that. So we can have twice, well, you can't actually have twice as many decimals, but you can have more decimal places by defining a double as long. But again, doubles do take up huge amounts of decimals, so it's unlikely you're going to need a long double, sorry. It's unlikely you're even going to need a double. You're probably going to be using a float most of the time, because a float does take up a lot of space by itself, okay? Just so you know, floats can't be long. The only thing that can be long are doubles and ints, and the only thing that can be short is ints, and the only thing that can be unsigned and signed are ints, okay? So, don't try and make a signed long float, okay, because it won't work. And, you know, don't try and make an unsigned short char variable, or a bool variable for that matter. The unsigned and short only work on int, and long is the only one that works on another variable type, and that is double, okay? So I just wanted to clear that up as well. And now we've just covered this, I'm happy, because I hope everyone understands this, because it's quite a sensitive matter, you know, it can be quite confusing. So let's just summarize again. Whenever we create an int, if we don't explicitly define whether it's short, long, and signed or unsigned, the compiler decides for us. And again, this is compiler specific, so whilst on VC++, it says, okay, if you haven't defined it, I define it as an unsigned long, or as a signed long rather, sorry. It could be completely different for another compiler, so that's just something you want to keep in mind. And generally, the reason I didn't go over signed in the previous tutorial is because, as I said before, ints are by default signed, so that's why I didn't go over it, but it is kind of something we need to touch on, and that's why I've just done this very quick tutorial on the signed keyword, and also going over by default, you know, things are signed and long, okay? So anyway, this has just been a quick tutorial by ASAP12, over and out.